Hello and welcome to the latest EdSource Roundtable. Today we'll be talking about changes to math placement at community colleges and how they will affect STEM students. I'm Michael Burke, a higher education reporter here at EdSource.
And I'm Amy DePiro, also a higher education reporter for EdSource.
And the two of us will be moderating today. Under Assembly Bill 1705, which was signed into law in 2022, California's community colleges plan to enroll more STEM students directly into calculus starting next year, skipping prerequisite courses like trigonometry and pre-calculus. The law built off a previous law, Assembly Bill 705, that allowed students to skip many remedial courses and start in transfer level classes. Math departments, as I said, across the state have until next year, July of next year, to implement 1705. So in the next hour, we'll explore the intent behind the law, how it's being implemented, and concerns that some professors and students have. And lastly, before we get started, EdSource wouldn't be able to bring us all together for these roundtables each month without the support of our funders. So for today's roundtable, thank you to the Gates Foundation for making it possible. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with John Hetz, Executive Vice Chancellor of the Office of Innovation, Data, Evidence, and Analytics for the Chancellor's Office of the California Community Colleges. Tina Akers-Porter, a math professor at Modesto Junior College, where she also currently serves as co-chair of the college's curriculum committee and the college's AB 1705 coordinator. Rena Weiss, a math professor and the AB 705/AB 1705 math innovation coordinator, at Moorpark College. We have Alicia Sudowich Fitzpatrick, a student at American River College, where she's also the college's student senate president. She will graduate at the end of this semester with an associate degree in anthropology. We have Doug Yegi, another math professor at Chaffey College. He's currently teaching calculus with co-requisite support, something you'll learn more about on today's roundtable. And that course is open to all students, including those who haven't previously taken pre-calculus at the college. And lastly, we have Tammy Marshall, who is the Dean of Math, Science, Engineering at Cuyamaca College. Prior to that, Tammy was a math teacher for 26 years at the college. 11 of those, she was department chair. And also would like to welcome everyone joining today in the audience. So our first question, especially for any audience members tuning in who are a little bit less familiar with 1705, I want to start with Tammy. Tammy, can you please tell us a little bit about, as far as you understand it, the thinking behind the law and sort of the research findings that motivated bringing this law after 705 obviously was already in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start by thanking EdSource for having me here. I'm super humbled to be asked to be a part of this panel and with such esteemed colleagues. I want to, so in answering to this question, my basic overall understanding with regards to AB 705 and AB 1705 is, well, AB 1705, sorry, has to do with AB 705 is one of the reasons why AB 1705 came into play. And that is that, generally speaking, from our experience at Cuyamaca, the innovations that we were doing, the co-requisite supports were working, and not everyone was implementing AB 705 in what was considered the intention of the law, and therefore AB 1705 kind of came into play. And the whole idea of AB 1705 is really to help people think beyond traditional ways for students to take math classes, to proceed in their in their coursework, especially when it comes to what math is required for that. So, when we think about the research regarding what led to this, it really has to do with the fact that when we look at the math classes that students succeed in, right, that they are successful in completing, they're not often successful in completing the classes that they need for their degrees, right? So we're here to talk specifically about STEM, which is one portion of AB 1705. So I also want to make that clear, right? That's just one portion of AB 1705, that the rest of it is really similar, but this is where what our focus is today. And so when we look at the data, And our data at Cuyamaca was very similar to the data we see everywhere, and that is that the attrition of our students when they take pre-calculus or took remedial classes, if they were a STEM major, was that they didn't complete calculus. Very few of them did. So we weren't doing them a service. We weren't supporting them. We weren't doing what we needed to do. And that is what we see across the state, is that students aren't successful. And in general, students aren't successful. And so therefore, what can we do? And this is one of this law helps us with one of the things that we have seen to be successful. It doesn't mean it's the only thing, but for right now, this is one of the highest things that we can do that's going to affect the most students. And at Cuyamaca, we have seen that happen. We have seen in our, because we implemented, like Doug, we implement at Chafee, we implemented this starting in the fall of 2023. So we're now in the third semester of offering calculus with support for students who didn't take pre-calculus, right, in the past or other courses. And we have seen extreme success in what our students have achieved, going from less than 30% of our students completing calculus 1 in a year to 70% of our students completing, of those same students looking at placement in one semester. It's huge.
Thank you, Tammy. I want to bring in some of our math professors. I'll start with you, Tina. Can you summarize? I know that there are a lot of math professors across the state who have, varying levels of concerns, questions about 1705. Can you kind of share, maybe summarize some of the concerns that you've been hearing about, whether the law and its implementation is going to work as intended?
Sure, there's faculty up and down the state that are very concerned, and the concerns don't center too much around the law. It concerns around the implementation guidelines that the Chancellor's Office has put forward that don't exactly match up well with the law. So some of the concerns are how placement groups were defined, including students who had completed pre-calculus and calculus in the lowest placement group, and then measuring them again in calculus. And I know some colleges have created an open enrollment to their Calculus 1 courses with support, but that's not a guarantee that those students didn't have preparatory calculus before taking that course. Some other concerns are the validation criteria that has been put forth by the Chancellor's Office. It's a very strict validation requirement. It requires only 15% of students without preparatory courses to be successful in calculus to be able to justify not validating a pre-calculus course. And that was based by what we were told on some decision theory research from the 1960s. So that was a little bit concerning, but then also requiring a 50% throughput rate from a preparatory course to a calculus course. So much higher throughput success rate than direct enrollment. Additionally, I would say some of it is also based on how the guidance gives us some concerns for equity. It becomes a one-size-fits-all. None of the colleges, including Cuyamaca, Moorpark, or Chafee, fully validated their sequences from before. And so it was a little concerning that no college could support their current preparatory course sequence under the validation criteria that was sent to us. And one size fits all is definitely not in the name of equity. And then lastly, I would say a lot of faculty and beyond have some concerns with the data that was used to justify the changes in the implementation guidelines.
So, John, since the Chancellor's Office was just brought up, I want to give you a chance to respond. Can you tell us a little bit about the Chancellor's Office, plans for implementation, the thinking behind the guidance, and anything else you want to respond to that was just mentioned by Tina?
Sure, absolutely. I wanted to start, Michael and Amy and the team at EdSource. I wanted to also thank you for putting this panel together. It's been really important. It's been a priority for the Chancellor's Office to think about this important and deeply meaningful work. It's been the heart at some of the kind of most challenging questions of how our colleges can best serve the students of California. So we've been endeavoring all along. So I think you've linked to a number of our resources that we've developed to help support colleges in their implementation, to provide resources and information to faculty, to colleges, to the folks across the state who have questions about what we're doing and why. And so we have a pretty substantial list of resources available at our equitable placement support and completion part of our website, as well as a ton of work that we've supported with the RP group and others. So just a couple of things. I do want to start with one kind of critical reframing from the beginning. So Michael, one of the things that you said, I don't think is accurate about either 705 or 1705. At heart, neither one of them is really about allowing students to skip classes, right? At heart, what they are is based on a really substantial set of research across not just California, but across the country that suggests that the way that we place students into our courses in community colleges vastly underestimated their capacity. So it tended to over-rely on measures of student performance or measures of student capacity that was uncorrelated with their performance. And so what you saw is this huge amount of work that showed that the strongest predictors of student performance was how they did in high school, not standardized tests. That if you wanted to understand how students were understand how best to support students, co-requisite support was far more effective than prerequisite support at getting students to complete the course that you're targeting. And that repeating courses previously taken doesn't actually help students, and in many cases makes them less likely to complete the subsequent course, right? It delays their progress, and for students who are on the upper end of the distribution, it tends to actually make them do worse in the subsequent course. And so that's this background of research that suggests that we had largely gotten assessment and placement wrong. And so just to kind of tie up one of the things that Tammy said earlier, one of the critical things here is that based on this body of research, AB 705, to try and encourage us to do the right thing and to more appropriately and accurately place students in courses and support them on their progression in English and mathematics. And that was a widely successful set of work across all of our colleges. Like the changes even amongst some of our slowest implementers are quite remarkable, but it was very uneven. And so one of the consequences that we saw is that a variety of institutions took a variety of paths that intentionally diluted the impact of AB 705, doing things like moving large portions of their prerequisite sequence into non-credit, encouraging students onto that pathway. But more problematically, for the reason that we're here today, is a variety of colleges did two things that were very challenging. One of them was to lengthen their transfer level sequence prior to calculus. So adding courses to that sequence that they didn't previously have, and then placing fewer students further in that sequence. So what you saw, in contrast to what we saw helping us better recognize students' capacity, is in these STEM fields, what we did is we placed fewer students into calculus or pre-calculus than we did before, which was really flagrantly flew in the face of all the evidence that we have and what we were being encouraged to do, which is how we arrived here today, right? And so core amongst this, like one of the core features of this law, we're ending up talking about this very, very small piece of the law, but a core feature of this law is a very fundamental recognition, and that is students should progress naturally, right? And that students shouldn't be forced to repeat courses that they've successfully completed, both because it's an enormous opportunity cost for students, and also because the evidence doesn't suggest that that helps them do better on that next course and makes it less likely for them to complete. So that really fundamentally is at the heart of it, where we're ending up spending a very large amount of our time in discussion, and what seems to be like the core of where people are really wrestling with, is this small set of students in STEM. And I say small because it's not the entirety of STEM majors, right? A pretty large proportion of STEM majors are students who are B- or better students in high school who have gotten to pre-calculus or trigonometry, or at the very least to intermediate algebra. And what we've done in the past is make those students go through a pretty long sequence, sometimes repeating those courses to go to calculus. So let's set aside those students, because most of those students can be successful given the right support. And that's really what this law is about. When we end up talking about, and I think where you framed this argument was about skipping, like whether or not students are being allowed to skip prerequisites. So we spent a lot of time trying to do a deep dive on understanding what's happening with students who finished in geometry or intermediate algebra or lower in high school and how they're likely to do, and trying to pull apart all the possible ways that those students are likely to be successful and how they might have gotten to calculus in the first place. And it's true, we don't have all the evidence that we would love to have in this case. And we constantly are seeking more evidence. One of the things I try and regularly say is any college, any individual, any institution that has evidence that thinks that suggests that we should do something different, the Chancellor's Office continues to solicit that evidence. We evaluate that all super carefully. We are 100% behind making sure that we are addressing the authentic implementation of this law in ways that are most supportive of students. So I just wanted, I had to start from that reframing. In terms of some of the specific things, I've addressed some of them. We've tried to dive deep onto understanding how students got there. In terms of holding colleges to particular standards. One of the things that we spent a lot of time is thinking about how differently to think about what highly unlikely to succeed is, right? And I think people have made a lot of different cases for where that should land. I think there's a variety of ways that people have understood probabilistic language over time that supports a 15% baseline for that, but it actually wouldn't matter very much. And that's not really the core of where our guidance is landing, because really what ends up happening is the comparison of how students do as a function of where they land helps settle the question pretty definitively. And so I'll just give you an example, right? One of the things that we see quite a huge amount of variance is these sets of students, highly successful, more likely to be who STEM majors are. Students who are B- or better students in high school who have pre-calculus or trigonometry or better. Huge variation across the state in whether or not those students get into calculus, from as low as 7% at some colleges to as high as 77% at some colleges, with across the system, more than half of those students not starting in calculus, right? Now, these are all high-performing high school students, right? We're looking within this group. And the consequence for those students of starting in calculus versus starting below calculus is a drop of nearly 50% in their likelihood of completing calculus. Not the STEM degree, just completing calculus. So high-performing students who have the prerequisite in place are not getting the appropriate opportunities. And that's really the core of what's going on. And so I just want to really make sure that we are focusing on the reason that this law exists. And what we're talking about is an edge case that the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and I think everyone around the state, continues to want to wrestle with and understand how best to support those students. But the core of what this law is asking us to do, very evidence-based, and the evidence for it is pretty strong.
Thank you, John. I'm going to bring in our student panelist, Alicia. You shared a question with EdSource ahead of this event. And to paraphrase it, your question was something along the lines of, if a student perhaps hasn't taken every traditional prerequisite to calculus and is wanting to be a physician, how will they be supported? And so I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're hearing from students about STEM math education and which questions you have for colleges?
So this is a question that is not just hypothetical. This is a real life example. I am a peer mentor and I deal with a lot of adult foster youth. I had a gentleman who, very passionate, wanted to be a STEM major, not bio, but math based. And luckily, we went through it and he doesn't fall within the requirements because he started now, but the counselor made sure to mention he is under this date. If he stops at any time, AB 1705 will affect him. We're worried about the amount of classes that students will have to take to start in these avenues. So he had to start in pre-calculus and he hasn't had anything but integrated math 1, little hesitant. So we're worried about how many classes do we really have? I know this is the STEM part, but we have the English. So then you have 2 support classes for just 2 classes, which equals 4 classes and extra units. So we're concerned about how many classes are we really taking in the education we're getting, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. And I wonder, are there other questions that you wanted, raise that have come up in your conversations with students?
Yes, we're worried about the unit load. This also ties into the support classes, how it affects financial aid, how it affects our time, the lost momentum scale of how long is it going to take us to graduate? We have, for the California Promise Grant, we have 2 years. And if we have to take extra support classes, and if you're working on top of this, it becomes more difficult to balance and get through into, which I feel AB 1705 is trying to help us get through. I understand the maximizing and putting us where we need to be. That makes a lot of sense. So we're worried about how the units play on life, how financial aid will adjust for the unit load. Do those units count on our 15 units that we have to carry? Also, we're also worried about the education itself. A lot of support classes are not as supportive as they could be, and it's just more work. So there's varying concerns, and they're all over the place because we don't know. And students like to be informed and be a part of the discussions on how our education is being modeled and how are we going to be successful. Also, I need to bring up non-traditional students because that is me. I hadn't taken any math in 10 years. And I came back wanting to be a bio major, and I had to start straight up in pre-calculus. I did not do as well because I hadn't been in math. So our non-traditional students, our DSPS community, I feel as if our DEIA students are being left behind. And so I'd really like to understand how the state kind of thought about the DSPS and the non-traditional students, as there are a lot of non-traditional students in community college trying to better their socioeconomic status.
Thank you, Alicia. So next, I guess I want to bring in Vina and Doug, and, maybe keeping in mind some of these questions that Alicia is observing from her own experience and from her peers' experience. I guess my question to the two of you is, what are your colleges doing to redesign courses, to rethink, the way that you're teaching math and the help that you're providing to students, especially some of these student population that Alicia's alluding to?
Yeah, well, I could speak to a couple of the things about what Chafee is doing in terms of the support courses and I know Alicia, you mentioned that they're required to take more classes now that they have to take these support courses and so on. At Chafee, our support course is tied directly to the parent course for calculus, for instance, and we offer right now multiple support courses for statistics, for business calculus, for calculus 1, for quantitative reasoning as well for non-STEM majors. But it's not necessarily from the student's perspective seen as an extra class. More so, it's folded into the framework of the course. So, for instance, Calculus 1 would be, let's say, a 2-hour course. The student registers for the support course, which is 1 hour prior or after the Calculus 1 course. And all of the support content is integrated within the content of the course itself. So from the student's perspective, I suppose it could be seen as an extra, hour each session for a Tuesday, Thursday class, so 2 extra hours a week. But this is also, speaking to what John was mentioning earlier, is that it's shortening the pathway. So even if they, are having to take an extra hour twice a week for the support content that they're going to need for calculus and beyond, it's less time than they would have to spend in college algebra, trigonometry, pre-calculus, and so on. And so I just wanted to mention that that's kind of the framework, and I could talk more about the, structure of our course itself, but I'll let Rena chime in as well.
Yeah, so we tried support courses for a short while. They didn't fill quickly. We didn't mandate students take them. So we scrapped them, and in that time of deciding, should we scrap them or should we, mandate that students within the lower GPA high school band, take these classes, or make them required to take them. We were realizing that our tutoring program was quite successful. So after AB 705, ultimately we invested in course embedded tutoring, and we have tutors in about 23 different courses right now. And those tutors would lead study sessions outside of class that are optional to students. So we scrapped those support courses. However, with AB 1705, of course, all our traditional pre-calculus courses have to go away as options for STEM students. So, of course, colleges have the option. Our college had the option between option A and option D, and those in the know what that means. Option A is essentially every college who adopts that must create an up to 2-unit support course to be taken alongside Calculus 1. And option D is that we still have to create that course. And also we have the option to create an innovative replacement for pre-calculus course. And so that is the option our college chose. Not we're part of a 3-college district, actually. Oxnard and Ventura colleges stayed with option A. We have a lot more faculty and more hands on deck. So we decided to experiment, and we're actually really excited about this new experimental course that we're creating. We are really worried that if the same methodology for validating a prerequisite to Calculus 1 is applied to this experimental course, that all of this great work that we're doing might be for nothing. Because we are only given 2 years to produce results, and then that will be evaluated. So I shouldn't say it's not for naught, because our colleagues do plan to use a lot of the resources that we're creating for that co-requisite course to Calculus 1. So that's an overview of what we're doing.
Thank you, Rena. And I see, Doug, that
Amy,
you have your hand raised.
Can I chime in with one thing?
Yes, please go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Doug.
Yeah, sorry, Doug, I didn't see your hand. I don't mind if Doug wants to go first. Okay. I just want to say, first off, I want to thank you, Alicia, for the questions, because it's really important that we hear from students, right? It is absolutely vital that we hear from you. And I understand all the questions. I totally get these questions. I 100% understand the concerns around the students, right? I want to start by saying all of the things that are being said has not been the experience of Cuyamaca, right? And that doesn't mean it hasn't been experiences elsewhere. I'm not going to say that it hasn't been, right? Because it very possibly has been. But one of the things that I want to say is regarding your question, one of the questions you had was about supporting students, right? And in our old model, how did we support students? I asked that question because the reality is we didn't. We weren't supporting students in the old model. We thought we were, because we thought students needed to repeat course content and needed to go through all of these courses in order to be successful. The intention was always thinking about students and their success. That was always the intention. That still is the intention. I always believe that everybody's intention is good for the students, right? Even if those that disagree with me, I know that that's everybody's intention, right? So I'll start with that. But we were not supporting students. because the number of students that would have had to, talking about the student that you were mentioning, right? That would have started in, say, a pre-algebra class, the number of students that would have started a pre-algebra class and ever completed calculus was single digits. It was horrible, the success rates. Looking at my own college, right? We had 4 students in something like 4 years that ever completed a transfer level class. And that was 1 class before calculus. Now, so what did we do? We had to stop and ask ourselves, what we're doing clearly isn't working, right? So something else has to be done. And what we've seen is that what we're doing is working, right? That's been our experience. I'm never going to say what other people's experiences has been. I will only say that has been our experiences, that we are now seeing huge successes for the students that you're talking about. But I also want to say, our old ways in doing things were not supporting students. They weren't. We just weren't.
Thank you, Tammy. Please go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment on the fact that Chafee, we had tried, like Rena mentioned, tried support courses prior to what our model is now, and they also did not work, mainly because they were optional to students. They were unlinked to a particular course with a particular professor. Students, a single professor might have 30 students from 20 different sections with 15 different instructors at different pacing and so on. Just like in anything, you try something, you throw it at the wall, see what sticks, and if it doesn't, then modify and try something else. And that's what we did. So we worked with our counseling department. We worked with our scheduling as well to link the courses to where a teacher that teaches the calculus course is linked directly to those students who are taking the support course. And as for the embedded tutors, it doesn't have to be either or. Chafee was lucky enough that our dean is extremely supportive of this and has secured funding for embedded tutors within our support courses as well. So, there's times where, towards the beginning of the semester, you've got let's say a 3-hour time span for the 1-hour support and the 2-hour calculus. You may be spending 2 to 2.5 hours just on the support content at the beginning to get them prepared for what they need for calculus. And, right now, approaching the end of the semester, you might be spending 2.5 hours on the calculus with only a half hour of support. It mixes in when you need so. But every class during that support time, we have an embedded tutor for that hour twice a week. I'm also lucky enough in my class to have an SI leader, a supplemental instruction leader. Not every one of our classes or support classes does, but all of our support classes do have an embedded tutor. So they can work. It's just that sometimes it doesn't necessarily look like the model is working. So I highly encourage colleges to modify what's not working and try something more.
Thank you, Doug. I think we have a few of our panels with their hands up. I think I saw Tina's first, so go ahead, Tina.
Great, thanks. Great question. I love hearing student questions. And I just wanted to say for us at Modesto, we had great success with co-requisite courses. We expanded our statistics and liberal arts math offerings significantly. We implemented AB 705 with enthusiasm. Early adopter, Tammy, Marshall, and I, we went to Cuyamaca many times to get ideas and practices. We're a much larger school, which sometimes it's hard to scale some of the work at larger campuses. And we're split across 2 campuses in the same city, which has its own challenges. But we, I just want to say for our students, it is a lot of math in one semester, but it's one semester. And that was sort of the brilliance of AB 705 and that implementation and looking at throughput. And I think it's important to note that that I was an early adopter. I built learning communities. When students do spend so much time in a class together, they tend to create study groups. It almost becomes a cohort feel. And so you get a lot of success because they are spending that time together and working together, and you're doing these active learning topics and projects. And I want to say, I think it's important to note that for AB 1705, there are lots of pieces of that law and that implementation that work. Honoring students' high school work is definitely important. And I think a lot of the community colleges that weren't doing that, we were doing that based off data we were given earlier on, MMAP data, our peak group data on sort of grit and where GPA should place students and things like that. So seeing that updated data, you know, that's very important. We don't always want to do what we did just because we did it. We definitely want to see and grow. I think what's a little bit lost here, though, is the reason AB 705 was so successful is courses like Algebra 2 or Intermediate Algebra weren't built for a statistics course. They weren't built for a Math for Liberal Arts course. They were built for the calculus bound student. That is who really that target audience was. And so using a 2-unit co-req tend to work because you were just in time remediating smaller, typically Algebra 1 topics. But now when we're pushing to calculus, this is a whole different discussion. All of this coursework in pre-calculus, it literally has the name calculus. This wasn't a course developed for some other course. This course was developed as a preparatory calculus course with all topics leading to calculus. And so as we're talking about this, I don't want to lose sight of that. And so remediating all of those topics, which in a general is a 6 to 7 hour minimum sequence or course of topics, is very hard to remediate in a 2-unit co-requisite versus Algebra 1 topics that we very successfully remediated in a 2-unit co-requisite. And that is where a lot of this concern stems. So when the student says, where do I start? If we follow out this implementation, that student will start in Calculus 1 with or without support. And some colleges are implementing a two-unit co-requisite. Some very much the language of option A, option D college. Option A, straight to calculus for the students, no preparatory options. Some are putting them directly in calculus with no support. And that's where a lot of this concern stems from.
Doug, you had your hands up. You wanted to tag it? No? Okay.
Yes, I just
sorry.
very briefly, I was going to echo what Tina mentioned as well, about the importance of how these support courses can and do work. And Tina, believe me, I get your concerns, and I'm not saying that that there aren't drawbacks to the way that the law is being implemented. Okay. But my view and the view of Chafee is until the law is modified, until the law is changed, here we are. How are we going to implement this at our own schools to try to give our students the best chance at success? And so in addition to
I think we might have lost Doug. Oh, never mind. Sorry. Doug,
Oh,
I think you might have been my end. I'm not sure, but
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. But I think a big component. Yeah, I'm seeing my connection is unstable, so I'm hoping that you can hear me here. But
we can hear you now. We can hear
okay,
you now.
good. So in addition, it's hugely important to build a cohort model with these students in the sense that you are building community from day one. You're creating a sense of belonging within the classroom. You're encouraging, and not only encouraging, but requiring collaboration and active learning, as opposed to being a passive bystander, as and learning the calculus with the prereq content. So in that regard, we teach it within our class a lot of the affective domain of grit and growth mindset and so on. But I'm a huge advocate for the fact that the reason that I feel it, personally, my class anecdotally works is because of the community building that we have created. And so when colleges are looking to, move forward with their co-requisite courses, that has to be a component. Secondly, our college has a community of practice required of all faculty members that are teaching any of the support courses, to where we meet every other Friday for 2 to 3 hours, to where we're creating content, we're creating activities, we're creating um, worksheets, activities, or whatever, Desmos, whatever it might be, that is going to be used for the support content. We get together as a whole group, but we work separately within our own courses, whether it's pre-calculus, calculus, quantitative reasoning, stats. And again, I think that that's a huge kind of necessary component of this implementation, because the teachers need to know, in addition to the students, that they are supported, whether they're adjuncts, whether they're full-time, that there's a community of practice together, that we're all in this together to, help the students to be as successful as they can be.
Thanks, Doug. And I see a couple panelists, Alicia and Rena, with their hands up. But I promised to get to you, so just hold tight. I wanted to ask John about, has the Chancellor's Office, when we're talking about these plans for next fall, co-requisite classes and also the preparatory courses, but I'm wondering, have there been any colleges that have been wanting to still offer the existing algebra, trig, or pre-calculus courses that have been approved by the Chancellor's Office, as far as you know, or will any colleges be offering those next fall?
Yeah, so so one of the things that we worked really hard to do is find as many ways as possible to support colleges that had anything that showed some evidence of success, even if it didn't meet fully all of the things that we were looking for. And so in the end, I think we ended up with, sorry, I had it right here a second ago. We had about 17 colleges that qualified for the ability to go ahead and continue to offer one or more of those courses. About half of them chose not to. So 9 of them chose to continue offering the course. And we had 64 colleges that chose to develop an innovative preparatory course, in addition to co-requisite support. So there's a lot of colleges. One of the things I think to be really clear about is we've very specifically built in the opportunities for colleges to continue to provide, prior to calculus, prerequisite support. We just want colleges to be thoughtful about how they are designing that in ways that make it so that those students are actually more likely to complete calculus. And so, there's both some colleges that are going to continue to be able to offer that, their previous existing courses. I think you're going to see a lot of colleges that are going to innovate around what their current course already did. That's usually where a lot of innovation starts. I think most colleges aren't going to just scrap it all and start from scratch, though I'm sure some will. And so there's a lot of space for colleges to continue to provide, prior to calculus, support to students.
Thanks, John. So we have a few people with their hands up. I think I saw Alicia's first. So Alicia, do you want to chime in?
This kind of question is for all of you and John as well. How are you all how are you helping your DSPS and your non-traditional students during this time? And then for John, are these classes, and I wrote it down there, are they considered in your general ed for your 90 units to transfer? And then also, how are you going to track this as successful? Is it only by the graduation rates, which are for community college? I looked at the states, it's not great. So is that how you're basing success? Or is it after the students get to CSU and use these skills from the courses? So kind of 3 questions at 2 different areas.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and let some of the other colleagues talk about some of their approaches, but let me answer some of your questions about like how we're going to evaluate it. And we're going to evaluate it in the same way that we always have done, in a very comprehensive way. So we pay attention to both one of the things that people classically pay attention to, which is the success rates in those courses. But we also pay attention to the rate at which students complete the course that they are trying to complete, right? So if you are a STEM major, in order to start off in your STEM pathway, you need to complete calculus. And so one of the core principles here is, are students more likely to complete calculus or not? That's really just a very straightforward thing. And that's something that's been part of our prerequisite requirements forever. We're just being held to that standard in ways that I don't think we were before. Like, it's always been true that for students to be assigned into a prerequisite, students have to become more likely to complete that subsequent course to be able to be assigned to that prerequisite. That's always been true. The one additional thing that this law very specifically tracks is how students do in subsequent courses. And we've done some of that internally looking at for AB 705 previously. So we get lots of questions about things like, well, what's happened to success rates in chemistry or in physics? And turns out success rates in introductory physics and chemistry courses are slightly higher. Not significantly, but they're not lower, right? And so what we'll be tracking going forward is how students are doing in subsequent courses in their STEM pipeline, most specifically Calculus 2, because the law very specifically asks about that. We will do as much as we can to track student success forward. It gets harder for us to track students' subsequent performance outside of our institutions because we don't have the same level of data. But that is something we continue to aspire to. But I can tell you, right, when we track students' subsequent performance forward within our institutions, you're not seeing that these students are less likely to do well, right? And that's what one of the common complaints has been, or expected negative consequences, and we don't see any evidence of that.
Real quickly, are you going to be sharing your successes, and if they're failures, I hope not, but will you be sharing those with the state?
I can't. I don't know how I can more adamantly say we continue to try and openly publish everything that we do about this. And one of the things that we have very transparently is a AB 705 dashboard that tracks across all kinds of subpopulations, that tracks across different institutions, different starting points. Like, we've tried to make a ton of information publicly available there. We anticipate doing exactly the same thing for AB 1705. It's going to be a little bit harder because the cell sizes are going to be a lot smaller. So we're going to run into probably not being able to show it for every institution, but having to show it in aggregate for the system. But we are 100% committed to being open and transparent about these things. I have the same position on this that some previous chancellors have, and that I think our current chancellor has, which is it's more important for us to be transparent about what's happening than have been right. Right? Because we're only going to get better as a system if we openly, wrestle with things good and bad. And I can tell you that I come from this from hard experience, because I remember back when the system was going to develop a statewide common assessment, and everyone in the system was going to get one standardized test that was going to do everything. And I was out there in the wild going, whoa, that's not what the evidence suggests. And I spent a lot of time trying to work with folks across the system to use an evidence-based approach to understanding how better to help our students be placed accurately based on their actual capacity. So we remain 100% committed to doing that, to supporting our colleges, to supporting our students, and making sure that if we got this wrong or this has gone too far, that we are going to fix that.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. So we've been keeping an eye on questions for the audience. Thank you, everyone, for sending in such smart questions. We can't get to all of them, but I wanted to maybe pick out a couple. One is a question regarding, how previous studies have measured success of, I guess, 705. And I suppose, sort of trying to anticipate the impact of 1705. And so the question is, has anyone studied how students' grades in calculus courses have changed depending on students' preparation prior to the course? So in other words, have we looked at not just whether or not the student passes the course as a binary outcome, depending on how many prerequisites they've taken, but their grades? Does anyone know one?
So, I mean, there's no evidence for us to do a post AB 1705 because 1705 hasn't been implemented yet. But I can tell you a couple of things for when we've done this research around AB 705, what we found. So what we found, generally speaking, is you do not see a substantive decrease in their overall GPA, i.e. the distribution of students' grades don't go downward. You see maybe a little bit of a pickup of some folks that who wouldn't have taken the course before getting B's and C's, right? So what you see, generally speaking, is that the students who would have had access to that course before continue to do well. The students who wouldn't have had access now have access to that course and complete. And so one of the things that people often get hung up on here is like, well, what does that mean for transfer? Like they got a B or a C in a transfer level math course. And if they had maybe gone through a 6-year sequence, or have given 6 years to get through a sequence, they might have gotten a higher grade. They might have gotten a B, right? And what we find is that actually tends to be much more likely to derail transfer. Like students taking longer to get to and complete their transfer level course, even if they get a good grade in that first course and get a slightly higher grade in that second course. And I'm just going to remind you, there's not a ton of evidence that that helps, right? What ends up happening is students who get a B or a C in that transfer level course early, much more likely to transfer, right? And so there's real opportunities that are created by these things. A variety of people take this in a variety of different ways. But one of the things that people frequently speak to about the students in our system is that the enemy of their success is time. That's their number one enemy. They have, and I think, Alicia, you spoke to this a little bit earlier, right? Thinking about the amount of time, how much aid students have, the amount of time they have to complete, how much time they have with education before they're going to be interrupted. And one of the things that these reforms do is pay very special attention to that and the limited amount of times that students have to, basically step out of their lives in order to engage with education and really respect that amount of time and help them be successful.
Thank you, John. And so Be Nice, I see that your hand is up. John also brought this up briefly. Alicia and others in the chat as well, I believe, or perhaps before the event have asked questions about, that perhaps more students failing the STEM math courses could have an impact on students' financial aid. And so, we've been wondering whether individual campuses have plans to address that problem. Vina, since you've had your hand up, feel free to answer that question if you have an answer to that question. And it seems perhaps outside of your purview.
Yeah, that's a bit outside of my purview. I wanted to address Alicia's point, though, about what are we doing for the special populations that might be disproportionately impacted by the law. I will just say that as we're devising this new innovative pre-calculus course replacement, the innovative part is a whole bunch of tools that evidence shows helps everybody. We recently implemented something sponsored by the Chancellor's Office to promote sense of belonging. So we did an activity in class that we hope will help students feel like they belong. And that sense of belonging actually might contribute to their success in the course. When we designed this new course, we're going to do all we can to make sure we have enough time in class to do active learning. We've asked for smaller class sizes, and we hope we'll get that, please. Hopefully from 40 down to 30. And so we're flipping the classroom, having students learn by video. They can watch and rewatch at home, do some sort of activity to show they understood it, come to class, and have tons of time on the board with groups. We'll have an in-class tutor. We've got a faculty member who figured out how to implement Desmos activities into Canvas. So it's active learning, and we see that kind of community building, that active learning actually helps all people groups, no matter where they come from. So wanted to share that.
I wanted to bring up a question we got in the audience, which is also one that I believe a lot of faculty, I know a few local academic senates have passed resolutions to this effect, and also I think the CSU Math Council as well, asking for a potential independent review or analysis of the RP group's data that was used in the validation process. I'm just curious. I'll go, I guess, John, since you're with the Chancellor's office, what do you make of that? Is that something you think I know you're not with the RP group, but that you think would be possible?
I mean, we have multiple different groups that are evaluating this on an ongoing basis. So the RP group is one. The folks at PPIC have been evaluating this on an ongoing basis as well. As the Wheelhouse does a variety of things, and every once in a while we have folks in other places that grab pieces of this. I can tell you they all find the same things pretty consistently. So, I'm not sure what it would mean to set up another contract to do so. But again, we're 100% open to anyone who wants to evaluate this data. We have folks that do research for us all the time, or I should say research on the students of our system all the time. And so if there are folks that have, the appropriate qualifications to handle, student level data in large quantities, we absolutely welcome the opportunity for other people to, get their hands dirty and do some evaluation. Typically speaking, what we find is a couple of things happen. They spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes that they're not aware of because they haven't worked with this data before. And then they usually end up in almost exactly the same place. And you can compare analyses that PPIC has done, the Wheelhouse has done, that the RP group has done, and there's little differences between them. And what they typically find is very, very similar things.
Thanks, John. Tina, you have your hand up. I know you haven't chimed in a while, so go ahead.
I was a primary contact on a resolution submitted to the Academic Senate of California Community Colleges asking questions about the data. I think some of the questions are a little bit more nuanced than what's presented here. There was a number of students, 1,634 students to be exact, that were used in the RP group data to show direct placement into Calculus 1 was successful and had higher throughput rates. But there was no discussion of, did we actually research to make sure that those 1,634 students did not have preparatory coursework in calculus? That was not addressed in that study. That's a very important piece given the policies that were in place at that time. Those are the kinds of questions about data we have. I will also say, validation rules, if we keep using the same validation rules that are set out, then yeah, we'll probably keep getting the same results. So the question is, are the validation rules sound? Is throughput the best measure from pre-calculus to calculus? Upwards of 30% of STEM and non-STEM majors change their major just based on learning what they want to do, being in courses, and I particularly had 3 majors in college. And so if a student doesn't persist from pre-calculus to calculus, is that assuredly because of the sequence? We can't say that with certainty unless we see and we do some qualitative research also. So there's a lot of questions surrounding the data and the use of throughput as a measure. We have validation criteria. Does a student do better in a subsequent course after taking the preparatory course? That's a very standard validation criteria. It doesn't have to be a throughput measure. It can be a success measure, those who've taken the preparatory coursework versus those who haven't.
We have less than a minute left. I know, Rena, you have your hand up if you want to make a quick final word. Have a quick final word.
Well, I do want to say that this whole idea of having a co-requisite instead of a prerequisite, we don't even know if that's going to work. We are in a grand experiment here in the state of California. Various colleges are having a variety of outcomes here. And if you look at that dashboard that John referred to, you can disaggregate the data by, are they in the lower GPA band? And we're not seeing a universal improvement of success for those students in the lower GPA band. In fact, it seems the group that is most benefiting from those co-requisite courses are the students that are in the higher GPA band. So I'm really interested to see the outcome of that. You know, what's the outcome of this experiment? Do those co-requisites do a good job at replacing the prerequisites? Again, that's why right now, with the exception of our co-requisite for Calculus 1, which is required by the law for us to offer, we are focusing on tutoring for our other courses. And I do just want to throw out here, because it's something really special that we learned, is that we believe tutoring works. We have all the data. We track the students when they go to tutoring. They are more successful than the general population, but just getting the students to tutoring was the biggest issue. So we implemented two-way texting. The tutors text the students, and our course embedded tutors saw a rise of about 800% in attendance right away as soon as we implemented it. And then we tracked those students. Did they do better than the general population? Yes, they did. So just wanted to put that out there. I think the state needs to know about it. We had a nice article published about it. You can Google Moorpark College.
Thanks, Rena. And John, I see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead. Short answer.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say a couple of quick things on the co-requisite part. And so one of the things we continue to evaluate is how successful co-requisites are in improving students' outcomes. The thing that we know that they are effective is that students who have the opportunity to take a course with a co-requisite are much more likely to take that, to successfully complete that course than students who have to take a prerequisite before getting to that course. Right. So the question of whether or not co-requisites are improve those students' outcomes over and above what would happen from taking that course, I think that's open. Whether or not co-requisites as an approach are more effective, that is actually quite well established both in California and across the country.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of our panelists and the audience also for joining us.